James Connor's heart stopped the moment he heard the elevator chime at midnight. He stood frozen on the 47th floor of Sterling Technologies, one hand still gripping the handle of his cleaning cart, the other reaching instinctively toward the conference room where his 6-year-old daughter Lily was curled up on the leather couch. The jacket he draped over her small body, his only winter coat, rose and fell with her peaceful breathing, completely unaware that their entire lives might be about to collapse. The babysitter had canceled 3 hours ago. No warning, just a text that lit up his phone while he was scrubbing the executive bathroom on the 43rd floor. James had called everyone he could think of. His Aunt Carla in Indiana, the neighbor who sometimes watched Lily for $20, even Amanda's mother who hadn't spoken to him since the divorce. No one answered. No one was available. No one cared that a 34-year-old man making $18 an hour was about to lose the only stable job he'd had in 2 years. So he'd driven home, collected his sleeping daughter from their studio apartment in Logan Square, and brought her back to the one place he wasn't supposed to bring her. The one place that could get him fired immediately, no questions, no second chances. He told himself it would be fine. The executive floor was always empty after 9. He'd finish his rounds, let Lily sleep somewhere warm and safe, and no one would ever know. The elevator chime echoed again, louder this time, and James felt his chest constrict with the kind of fear that made his hands shake and his vision narrow. Only 3 people had access cards for this floor after hours. He grabbed the card handle and turned toward the conference room, but his shoes squeaked on the freshly polished marble, and the sound carried in the silent hallway like a gunshot. Too late. The elevator doors slid open and Victoria Sterling stepped out into the corridor. Not just any executive, the CEO, the woman whose face had been on the cover of Forbes last month with the headline, "The Ice Queen of Tech." She wore a black Armani suit despite the hour, her dark hair pulled back in the severe bun that had become her signature. When her eyes locked onto James, they were the kind of cold that made grown men in boardrooms stumble over their presentations. Then her gaze shifted past him to the 3 weeks into the arrangement. James woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Lily's laughter echoing from the kitchen. He found them there, Victoria at the stove attempting pancakes while Lily sat at the counter, swinging her legs and offering commentary on technique with the brutal honesty only 6-year-olds possessed. "You're flipping them too early, Mommy Victoria. They're not bubbly yet." Victoria glanced up as James entered, and something passed between them that felt dangerously close to real. She'd started leaving the office at 6 most evenings, a shift that hadn't gone unnoticed by her staff. Sharon Valdez had commented last week during a conference call that Victoria seemed more focused in meetings, less brittle around the edges. "Your husband is magic," Sharon had joked, not knowing how close to the truth she was. Not magic, just desperation wearing the mask of domestic contentment. James poured himself coffee and watched Victoria flip a pancake with slightly more confidence than before. The first week had been performances, careful choreography of hand touches and practiced smiles. The second week, the choreography started feeling like muscle memory. Now, in week 3, he sometimes forgot they were pretending. "Daddy, can Mommy Victoria come to my school play next Friday? I'm tree number 3. Victoria's hand froze mid-flip, the spatula hovering in the air. She looked to James for guidance, and he saw the fear beneath her careful expression. Not fear of saying yes, but fear of what yes meant. That she was becoming part of something she hadn't paid for, something the contract didn't cover. "Of course she can, if she wants to." "I'd love to, sweetheart." The pancake burned. Victoria scraped it off onto a plate with a grimace, and Lily giggled. The sound was pure and uncomplicated, the kind of happiness that made James's chest ache because he knew it had an expiration date. 4 weeks from now, the contract would end, and they'd take their money and disappear, and Lily would have to learn again that the adults in her life could vanish without warning. That night, Victoria volunteered to put Lily to bed. James stood in the hallway outside Lily's room, listening through the crack in the door. Victoria sat on the edge of the canopy bed with a opinion of Where the Wild Things Are, reading with the stiff formality of someone presenting quarterly earnings to investors. "You're reading too fast." Lily's voice was gentle but critical. "Daddy does voices." A pause. Then Victoria attempted a monster voice that came out flat and monotone, and they roared their terrible roars. That's not a monster voice. I have no idea what I'm doing. The honesty in Victoria's voice made James lean closer to the door. He heard Lily shift on the bed, probably sitting up to look Victoria in the eye with that serious expression she got when dispensing wisdom beyond her years. It's okay. You can learn. Daddy wasn't good at first either. Victoria tried again, this time going so over the top with the monster voice that it circled back to ridiculous. Lily's laughter burst out like fireworks, delighted and surprised. And soon Victoria was laughing too. Real laughter. Not the polished corporate version she used at investor meetings. James found Victoria 20 minutes later, sitting on the floor outside Lily's room, knees drawn up to her chest like a child herself. She looked up when his shadow fell across her, and her eyes were wet. I've never been around children. I don't know how to be maternal. What if I'm terrible at this? James slid down the wall to sit beside her, their shoulders touching in the narrow hallway. You're not terrible. You're learning. That's different. At work, I know every answer. Here, I'm completely lost. Welcome to parenting. None of us know what we're doing. We just love them and hope it's enough. Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, natural, not practiced. They sat in comfortable silence, and James realized that the moments between the performances were becoming more real than the performances themselves. Somewhere in the past 3 weeks, the lie had started growing roots. The warning came on a Wednesday, week 3, mid-afternoon. Diane's voice on the phone carried the kind of tension that made James's stomach clench before she'd finished the first sentence. Nathan hired Whitmore and Associates, most aggressive PI firm in Chicago. They're interviewing people at Sterling, talking to Amanda, pulling financial records, looking for proof the marriage is fake. Victoria went pale in the way James had learned meant she was close to panic. Her knuckles went white around her coffee cup, and he watched her force herself to breathe evenly, maintaining control through sheer force of will. What did they find? Nothing yet, but Nathan's too confident. He knows something we don't, or he's about to discover something. That evening, Victoria's phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. James was close enough to see it over her shoulder. I know everything. Soon everyone else will too. Enjoy the fantasy while it lasts. N. Victoria stared at the screen for a long moment, then set the phone down with exaggerated care, like it might explode if handled roughly. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet James almost didn't hear it. He's going to reveal something at the board meeting. Something designed for maximum damage. What could he possibly know? We've been careful. Nathan always has contingency plans. She walked to the balcony, her safe space for processing fear. James followed, finding her gripping the railing hard enough that her arms trembled. The October wind was sharp off the lake, carrying the smell of coming winter. Talk to me. What's Nathan going to reveal? The silence stretched so long James thought she wouldn't answer. Then, barely audible over the wind, 8 years ago, my sister killed someone. James went still, waited, let the words settle in the cold air between them. March 17th, 2017, Sarah was 23, drunk and high on cocaine, hit and run on Lakeshore Drive. She killed a 19-year-old college student named David Morales. He died at the scene. Her voice was mechanical now, reciting facts like reading a police report. Sarah called me, terrified. I had a choice, call the police or protect my sister. I paid the Morales family $2.5 million to stay quiet. Got Sarah into the best rehab facility money could buy. She never faced charges. David was buried without justice, and his family got a check that couldn't possibly make up for losing their son. James processed this, watching Victoria's profile against the city lights. She looked carved from stone, every line of her face rigid with the effort of not falling apart. He thought about his own father dying slowly from lung cancer, about the desperation that made people cross lines they never thought they'd cross. How often do you think about David? The question seemed to surprise her. She turned to face him fully, and he saw tears tracking down her face that she didn't bother to wipe away. Every day, every single day for 8 years. Does Sarah? Yes, she's sober now, teaches middle school in Boston, calls me monthly to say thank you. I hear the guilt eating her alive through the phone the same way it eats at me. James moved closer, put his hands on her shoulders. Victoria, what you did was wrong. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. But you've been carrying this alone for 8 years. That's punishment enough. David's family lost their son. I helped make sure no one was held accountable. Then maybe it's time to try giving them something real instead of just money. Not legally, your lawyer would have a stroke, but as a person. Apologize. Acknowledge what can't be fixed. Victoria looked at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. They'd never agree to meet me. Maybe not, but you could try. The board meeting arrived too quickly. James stood in front of the bathroom mirror at 7 in the morning, adjusting his Tom Ford tie for the 5th time, trying to look like someone who belonged in corporate boardrooms instead of cleaning them. His hands shook slightly, and he gripped the marble counter to steady them. Victoria appeared in the doorway wearing her armor, a charcoal suit that probably cost more than James's old car, hair pulled back in that severe bun that meant she was preparing for battle. But her eyes betrayed her. She looked terrified in a way no amount of expensive clothing could hide. You look ready to terrify some board members. That's the idea. She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Armor for battle. Lily wandered in, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and Victoria's entire demeanor shifted. She poured orange juice without being asked, made toast with the careful attention of someone who'd been paying attention to morning routines, learning her daughter's patterns. Their daughter, the possessive, had started slipping into James's thoughts unbidden. Do you have to go to work today? Yes, sweetheart, but Maria will take you to school and pick you up, and tonight we'll do something special. Whatever you want. Can we make cookies? Absolutely. Chocolate chip? Lily nodded enthusiastically, already moving past the momentary disappointment with the resilience of children who'd learned early that adults had to leave sometimes. After she ran off to get ready for school, Victoria stood frozen at the counter, staring at the juice glass like it held answers. I'm scared, James. Scared of what Nathan's found. Scared of what he'll reveal. Scared that I've dragged you and Lily into something that's going to destroy all of us. James crossed the kitchen and took her hand. Then we face it together. No more pretending, at least not with each other. Whatever Nathan throws at us, we deal with it as partners. She nodded, but the fear didn't leave her eyes. It stayed there like a permanent resident, a reminder that some things couldn't be fixed with money or contracts or carefully rehearsed lies. The executive boardroom at Sterling Technologies was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Chicago's Loop. 47 stories of glass and steel, making it clear that the people who sat at this table operated above the everyday concerns of ordinary life. The mahogany conference table could seat 20, but today held 11 board members: Victoria, James, Nathan and his 2 lawyers, and Diane. Nathan sat at the far end with his legal team, folders stacked high in front of him like ammunition. He looked polished and confident in a way that made James's stomach turn. This was a man who'd spent 3 years planning Victoria's destruction, and he was finally ready to pull the trigger. Robert Hayes, the board chair, called the meeting to order with the gravity of someone presiding over a trial. We're here to address Nathan Pierce's lawsuit requesting removal of Victoria Sterling as CEO on grounds of mental instability and compromised judgment. Nathan, present your case. Nathan stood slowly, savoring the moment. Thank you, Robert. This isn't personal. It's about fiduciary responsibility. Victoria has demonstrated an inability to maintain work-life balance, leading to erratic decision-making that puts this company at risk. He pulled up his presentation on the massive screen behind him. Bank transfer records showing $50,000 wired to James the day after their marriage was filed. Security footage time-stamped from the night Victoria found James with Lily, clearly their first interaction. Employment records showing James's promotion exactly 24 hours after the marriage certificate was processed. Phone logs proving zero communication between them before that midnight encounter. This isn't a love story, it's a transaction. Victoria, facing scrutiny about her inability to maintain relationships, hired herself a family. She paid $50,000 up front, promised $150,000 more, plus career advancement for Mr. Connor. This is fraud designed to manipulate this board. Murmurs rippled around the table. Even Sharon looked troubled. and James felt his carefully constructed world starting to crack. Then Nathan played his trump card. A new slide appeared, a photograph of a young man with a bright smile frozen at 19 forever. David Morales, 19 years old, sophomore at UIC. On March 17, 2017, he was killed in a hit-and-run on Lakeshore Drive. The driver was never charged. Victoria's face went absolutely white. James grabbed her hand under the table, felt it ice cold and trembling. The driver was Sarah Sterling, Victoria's younger sister, drunk and high on cocaine. Victoria paid the Morales family $2.5 million to keep quiet, used her wealth and influence to obstruct justice, ensuring Sarah never faced consequences for killing a college student. Nathan produced documents, settlement agreements with names redacted but amounts visible, bank transfers, police reports mysteriously closed with suspicious notations. The evidence was damning, laid out with the precision of someone who'd been building this case for years. This is who you have running your company, someone who thinks money solves everything, who will sacrifice anything, including justice for a dead teenager, to protect her interests. You think this marriage is real? It's the same pattern. Victoria found a problem and threw money at it until it went away. The room erupted. Carol looked vindicated. Sharon looked devastated. Robert pounded his gavel, calling for order while chaos swirled around them. James felt Victoria's hand crushing his, felt her entire body rigid with the effort of not breaking down in front of everyone. Victoria, do you have a response? She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. James stood instead, pulling focus before he had consciously decided to move. Every eye in the room swung to him, and he felt the weight of judgment from people who'd never known what it meant to be invisible, to be desperate, to make choices that kept you awake at night. Mr. Pierce, you said David Morales was 19 when he died, a sophomore, whole life ahead of him. Nathan looked annoyed at the interruption. Yes, tragic loss. So you're using a dead kid as ammunition in a corporate power play. Does that seem right to you? I'm exposing the truth. No, you're exploiting a family's tragedy to win a board vote. You don't care about David Morales or justice. You care about hurting Victoria because she chose the company over you. James turned to address the full board, and the words came from somewhere deeper than rehearsal, somewhere honest and raw that he hadn't known he could access. 8 years ago, Victoria faced an impossible choice. Her sister, probably the only family she had left, called her terrified, guilty, facing prison. Victoria made a choice. Not a legal choice, not an unethical choice by any standard, but a human choice. He looked directly at Nathan. And you knew about it. You were her husband at the time, right? Did you report it to authorities? Nathan hesitated just long enough to reveal the answer. Thomas Liu leaned forward, voice sharp with sudden understanding. Nathan, did you know about this incident when it happened? That's not the point. Actually, it's precisely the point. Sharon's voice cut like a blade. You knew for 8 years and said nothing until Victoria divorced you. That's not concern for justice. That's revenge. James continued, momentum building. Victoria gave the Morales family money that couldn't possibly compensate for losing their son. She got Sarah into treatment. Sarah's been sober 7 years now, teaches middle school. Victoria's carried the guilt for 8 years, and I guarantee it's eaten at her every single day. His voice softened. You want to judge her for that? Fine. But don't pretend you're doing it for noble reasons. You're doing it because a woman you once loved chose something else over you, and you've spent 3 years plotting revenge. Robert Hayes' voice was cold steel. Nathan, obstruction of justice has a 3-year statute of limitations in Illinois. Even if everything you say is true, it's no longer prosecutable. You're dredging up old pain for political purposes. Carol Brennan surprisingly spoke up. I came here today prepared to support Nathan's motion, but this, she gestured at the presentation, this is vindictive. Using a dead boy's photograph as a PowerPoint slide, that's grotesque. The vote came swiftly. Robert's motion to dismiss the lawsuit and affirm Victoria as CEO passed 11-0, unanimous. Nathan gathered his papers with shaking hands, his carefully constructed case collapsing around him like a building imploding from the inside. He stopped by James and Victoria on his way out, leaning close enough that only they could hear. Enjoy your little fantasy. I wonder how your husband will feel when he learns all your secrets. After the board members filed out, Sharon hugging Victoria, Thomas giving James a respectful nod, Victoria collapsed in her chair. Diane left them alone, recognizing that some moments required privacy more than legal counsel. What did he mean, all your secrets? David is the only thing. He's bluffing. But James didn't believe it, and neither did Victoria. They sat in the empty boardroom as Chicago spread out below them. Two people who'd started as strangers and somewhere along the way had become something else. Something that didn't have a name yet, but felt dangerously close to real. That evening, after Lily was asleep, having made them read 4 books instead of the usual 2 because she sensed something was wrong, James found Victoria on her balcony again. She stood with her back to the city, face tilted up toward the October sky like she was searching for answers in the stars. You defended me. After knowing what I did, you defended me in front of everyone. James moved to stand beside her. You think I don't understand desperate choices? My dad had lung cancer. Insurance wouldn't cover experimental treatment. I seriously considered stealing the medication from the hospital pharmacy where I work part-time. Planned it out, figured out how to bypass security. Only reason I didn't is because Dad refused, said he wouldn't let me ruin my life for his. Victoria turned to look at him, really look at him like she was seeing him for the first time. You never told me that. We all have moments where we're willing to cross lines for people we love. You crossed yours. You've been punishing yourself for 8 years. Maybe that's enough. She leaned against him, and he wrapped his arms around her without thinking about performance or contracts or anything except the fact that she was shaking and he wanted to make it stop. They stood like that for a long time, watching the city lights blur and sharpen as tears dried on both their faces. This arrangement, we said 6 weeks, but I'm starting to want, she stopped herself. Want what? For this to be real. Come home to you and Lily, make dinner, read bedtime stories. Have someone who defends me, not because they're paid to, but because they actually care. James cupped her face, tilted it up so she had to meet his eyes. What if I'm not trapped? What if I'm choosing to stay? You don't know me well enough to choose that. Then give me time to know you. Real time, not performance time. He made the decision as he spoke it, felt it settle in his chest like something inevitable. We have 3 weeks left on the contract. Let's make them real. No more pretending, at least not with each other. And at the end, we decide what happens next based on truth, not obligation. Victoria searched his face like she was looking for proof this wasn't another manipulation, another transaction dressed up as something more. Then she kissed him, desperate and real and full of months of loneliness, finally finding somewhere to land. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. And if it doesn't work, then I leave with what we agreed, but if it does, he didn't finish the thought, both of them too scared to voice what "if it does" might mean. They told Lily together the next morning, both sitting on the edge of her canopy bed while she clutched her rabbit and looked at them with eyes too old for 6 years. You asked if Daddy and I are lying. Victoria's voice was gentle but honest. The truth is we started by pretending, but we're not pretending anymore. We're trying to be a real family. How would you feel about that? Lily studied them both with that serious expression she got when processing big information. I already knew you were pretending at first. I'm not a baby, but I think you stopped pretending a while ago. You look at each other like Daddy used to look at Mommy Amanda before she left. The observation hit both adults like cold water. Victoria laughed, surprised and a little awed. You're very smart, you know that? I want you to be my real mom. Can I still call you Mommy Victoria? You can call me Mom, just Mom if you want. Lily threw her arms around Victoria's neck, and James joined the embrace. And for the first time, it felt like something they weren't performing. It felt like something they were building brick by brick, on a foundation that had started as lies but was slowly becoming something solid. The call from Diane came that afternoon. Rosa Morales wants to meet with you, David's mother. She saw the news coverage of the board meeting, saw Nathan's accusations. She wants to talk. Face to face, Victoria went pale. Why, she can't sue. Statute of limitations. She didn't say, just that she wants to meet. They drove to a small Mexican restaurant in Pilsen on Saturday evening, Victoria insisting James come with her. Diane waited at a separate table, giving them space but staying close in case things went badly. Rosa Morales sat in a corner booth, late 50s, wearing a simple dress and crucifix necklace. Her face was lined with the kind of grief that never fully heals, the permanent mark left by losing a child. She spoke in Spanish first, and Victoria responded haltingly but fluently. James hadn't known she spoke Spanish, hadn't known a lot of things about her he was discovering. Rosa switched to English, her voice carrying the weight of 8 years of unanswered questions. You paid me to be quiet about David. Yes, and I'm sorry. Why you come now? Lawyers say I cannot sue. Too many years pass. I'm not here because of lawyers. I'm here because my husband told me I needed to try to give you something real instead of just money. An apology. Acknowledgement that what I did was wrong. Rosa studied Victoria with eyes that had seen too much suffering, too much injustice that money couldn't fix. Your sister, she killed my son. You give money so she not go to jail. Yes, I won't make excuses for that. I chose my sister over justice for David. You have children? Victoria glanced at James, not biologically, but yes, I'm raising my husband's daughter. Then you understand. You understand why mother do anything to save her child. The words hit Victoria visibly. She nodded, tears streaming down her face that she didn't try to hide. Rosa continued, pulling out a worn photograph from her wallet, a young man with a bright smile, frozen forever at 19. Your sister, she write me letters. Every year on March 15th, she say sorry. She say she go to church, pray for David. She try to be good person now. Victoria looked shocked. I didn't know Sarah contacted you. She not use your money to pay me. She use her money, teacher money. Small amount each year, she say is for David's brothers. For college. Rosa placed her hand over Victoria's across the table. I am Catholic. I believe in forgiveness. Even when it hurts so much, I cannot breathe. You did wrong thing. Your sister did wrong thing. But you both carry this. She touched her chest. This pain here. Forever. That is your punishment. Living with it. Victoria broke down completely, and James watched Rosa, this woman who had every right to hate them, offering comfort instead of condemnation, offering something that looked impossibly like grace. I'm so sorry. I know, I see it. Your husband, he love you? James answered without hesitation. Yes. Then you have chance at happy. Take it. Do not waste time on guilt. That changed nothing. Honor my David by being good to that little girl, by making good choices now. After they left, Victoria cried in the car for 20 minutes. James held her while she shook, while 8 years of carrying something too heavy finally found somewhere to release. When she could breathe again, she looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. How did you know I needed that? Because you can't move forward while you're still running from the past. And I think you want to move forward now with Lily, with me, with life young. I do. God help me, I really do. They drove home in silence, but it was the comfortable kind, the kind that meant they'd crossed some invisible threshold together. The kind that meant whatever happened next, they'd face it as partners instead of strangers pretending to be something they weren't. The lie had become the most honest thing either of them had in a long time, and neither knew quite what to do with that truth except hold on to it and hope it was strong enough to survive whatever came next. In conference room door, where Lily's small form was visible on the couch, and something in Victoria's expression changed, not anger, something worse, something that looked almost like panic. The air between them seemed to crystallize. James opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His mind raced through explanations, apologies, pleas, anything that might salvage this disaster. He thought about the letter from Amanda's lawyer that had arrived 2 weeks ago, the one with the language burned into his brain like a brand. Father lacks stable employment and appropriate living conditions for minor child. One more strike. That's all it would take. One more reason for a judge to look at him and see a man who couldn't provide, couldn't protect, couldn't be trusted with his own daughter. Victoria walked past him without a word. heels clicking on the marble with the precise rhythm of someone who had never doubted her right to be anywhere. She stopped at the threshold of the conference room and stood there, staring at Lily's sleeping form. James noticed that her hands were trembling slightly, though whether from anger or something else, he couldn't tell. When she finally turned to face him, her voice was perfectly controlled, which somehow made it more terrifying than if she'd shouted. Each word came out measured and cold, like a judge reading a sentence. You brought a child into my building, after hours, into my private conference room. James's mouth went dry. Every word he'd prepared evaporated. All he could think about was the custody hearing scheduled for next month, about Amanda's new boyfriend Richard with his VP salary and his three-bedroom house in Lincoln Park, about Lily asking him last week why they never had enough food at the end of the month. Miss Sterling, I can explain. Conference room now. She walked past him again, and James forced his legs to move, forced himself to follow her into the room where Lily slept, forced himself to stand there while Victoria positioned herself by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago's glittering skyline. The city spread out below them like a promise neither of them could touch. All that wealth and possibility, right there, completely out of reach. Victoria didn't turn around. She stood with her back to him, silhouetted against the lights, and when she spoke, her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. The question hit him like a physical blow. How much do you love your daughter? James blinked, thrown completely off balance. I'm sorry, what? Would you do anything to keep her? Victoria's voice was rough now, stripped of its corporate polish. Would you lie? Would you pretend? Would you let strangers believe something that isn't true if it meant she stayed with you? His throat tightened. He looked at Lily sleeping peacefully, her small chest rising and falling, with the deep, untroubled breaths of someone who still believed her father could protect her from anything. Someone who didn't know that protection sometimes meant making choices that kept you awake at night. Of course I would. She's everything. Victoria nodded slowly, like he'd just passed some test he didn't know he was taking. Then she turned to face him, and James saw something in her expression that terrified him more than anger ever could. She looked scared, actually genuinely scared, in a way that made no sense for a woman who ran a $500 million company. Then I need you to listen very carefully. In the next minute, I'm going to make you an offer. If you say no, you walk out of here tonight and never come back. Security will escort you out, and your employment record will show termination for a cause. Her phone buzzed on the conference table. James saw the name on the screen, Nathan, and watched Victoria's face go even paler. She silenced it without looking at the message. But if you say yes, both our lives change forever. There's no going back, no second chances, no changing your mind in a week when you realize what you have agreed to. James felt like the floor was tilting beneath him. I don't understand. Victoria's next words came out clipped and precise, like she was negotiating a merger. Like she was discussing something that didn't involve two strangers standing in an empty office at midnight. Like she wasn't asking him to do something that sounded completely insane. Pretend you're my husband, starting tomorrow in front of everyone who matters, board members, investors, judges, or pack your things tonight and explain to a family court judge why you lost your stable job. The room spun. James gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. Why? Why would you possibly need? Because someone very dangerous is trying to take everything from me, and you're the only person in this building who has something to lose just as badly as I do. She pulled out her phone and opened a document, her fingers moving with the kind of efficiency that came from a lifetime of making decisions under pressure. James watched her scroll through legal filings, depositions, evidence of something he didn't understand but could feel the weight of. My ex-husband filed a lawsuit 3 days ago. He's claiming I'm mentally unstable and unfit to run this company. The board votes in 3 weeks on whether to remove me as CEO. She swiped to another screen and held it out. James saw dense legal language, motions filled with psychiatric terminology and business jargon that might as well have been written in a foreign language. Nathan Pierce is arguing that I have no life outside this office. No family, no stability, just an obsession with power that's warping my judgment. And he's not entirely wrong. Her voice cracked on the last word, and James realized with a shock that she was telling him the truth. Not the corporate version, not the carefully managed public persona, but something raw and desperate. I need to prove I have balance, a family, stability. And you, she looked at him with an expression that mixed desperation and calculation in equal measure. You're a single father working night shifts to provide for your daughter. You're devoted, reliable, exactly what I need people to see. James's head was spinning. None of this made sense. CEOs didn't proposition janitors at midnight. They didn't offer to solve custody disputes or promise money they couldn't possibly be serious about. This was the kind of thing that happened in movies, not to guys who dropped out of community college to take care of their dying fathers. You want me to lie to your board of directors? I want you to play a role for 6 weeks. You'll appear at board meetings, investor dinners, court proceedings as my husband. We'll create a backstory that explains how we met, why we married quickly, why no one knew about it. This is insane. This is survival. Victoria's mask slipped completely, and James saw genuine terror underneath. Nathan isn't just trying to take my company. He's trying to destroy me. He's been planning this for 3 years, planting stories with journalists, manipulating board members, hiring private investigators to dig up anything he can weaponize. This lawsuit is just the opening move. Why would he hate you that much? Because I chose the company over him, over our marriage. Because I discovered he was embezzling $8 million and I gave him a choice. Leave quietly with a generous settlement or I'd go to the authorities. He took the money, but he's never forgiven me for it. She pulled up another document and James saw numbers that made his breath catch. A contract laid out in the kind of precise legal language that made everything feel both more real and more surreal. $50,000 up front, deposited within 24 hours. Another $150,000 when this is over in 6 weeks. Your daughter will attend Rosewood Academy, fully paid, $48,000 a year. You'll be promoted to Director of Facilities Management, $92,000 annual salary starting immediately. James stared at the numbers. $200,000. Lily in the best private school in Chicago, a salary that would let him fight Amanda's custody claim and actually win. Or he could call her bluff, walk away with his pride intact, and watch everything fall apart in slow motion over the next month. Or I call security right now and you're fired for policy violations. Your employment record shows termination for cause, and you get to explain to a judge why you lost your stable job. Your ex-wife's lawyer will have a field day with that, won't he? The threat hung in the air between them like poison gas. James looked at Lily one more time, at her worn sneakers that were getting too small, at the jacket that was supposed to be his winter coat, but spent most nights keeping her warm, at the future he couldn't give her on $18 an hour while paying Amanda $900 a month in child support. If I do this, his voice came out rough. What exactly happens? My lawyer will brief you tomorrow. We'll create a detailed backstory, where we met, how we fell in love, why we married quickly. You'll sign a contract that makes everything legally binding. We'll get marriage certificates filed with the city, a prenuptial agreement protecting my assets. You'll move into my penthouse on Lakeshore Drive with Emma. And you'll convince everyone who matters that we're genuinely happy together. For 6 weeks, that's all I need. Then you walk away with enough money to fight any custody battle and never worry about rent again. James felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff in the dark with someone offering to pay him to jump, not knowing what was at the bottom. His father's voice echoed in his head, the man who'd spent 40 years welding union jobs and never apologized for working with his hands. Honest work for honest pay, son. That's all a man needs. What would his father think of this? Of his son selling his integrity for a chance at something better? But then he thought about the letter from Amanda's lawyer that had arrived last week, about the part that said, father's work schedule precludes adequate supervision and stable home environment, about the follow-up that said Amanda was prepared to file for full custody with supervised visitation only. One more strike against him, and the judge might listen. Okay. The word came out before James could stop it, before he could think through all the ways this could destroy him. I'll do it. Victoria's shoulders dropped slightly, relief flashing across her face before the mask snapped back into place. My driver will pick you up tomorrow at noon. Bring everything you own. We start immediately. She walked toward the door, then paused without turning around. And James, if you tell anyone the truth about this arrangement, the deal is off and you're finished. My lawyers will bury you in litigation for breach of contract, and you'll lose everything anyway. Do you understand? I understand. After she left, James stood in the empty conference room, the magnitude of what he'd just agreed to crashing over him like a wave. Lily woke up and rubbed her eyes, her small voice cutting through his spiral of panic. Daddy, I had a dream about a castle. James picked her up, feeling her small arms wrap around his neck with the kind of trust that made his chest ache. Yeah, baby. We lived there, you and me, and a pretty lady. Was that real? His throat tightened. Not yet, sweetheart, but maybe soon. Is the lady nice? He thought about the fear in Victoria's eyes, the desperation in her voice, the way her hands had shaken when she'd made her offer. I don't know yet, but I think she's trying to be. The next morning, James packed their entire lives into 3 suitcases and 2 cardboard boxes from the dumpster behind their building. It took less than an hour. The studio apartment in Logan Square had been temporary for 2 years now. Temporary because James kept telling himself he'd find something better. Somewhere Lily could have her own room, somewhere the heat worked consistently and the neighbors didn't fight through the walls until 3 in the morning. Lily sat on the bed watching him, clutching the stuffed rabbit that Amanda had given her 3 birthdays ago, back when Amanda still pretended to care. Her small face was serious in the way children get when they sense something big is happening, but don't have the words to ask about it. Are we going on a trip? Something like that. For how long? James knelt down beside her, trying to find words that weren't exactly lies but weren't the truth either. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that her father just agreed to fake a marriage to save both their futures? How do you make that sound like anything other than the desperate gamble it was? Remember how Daddy has to work really hard sometimes to take care of you? Lily nodded solemnly, her dark eyes too old for her face. Well, I'm going to do a special job for the next few weeks. We're going to stay with someone, a lady named Miss Sterling. And it's really important that you're on your best behavior, okay? We're going to pretend something for a little while. Her eyes narrowed. She was 6, but she was sharp. Too sharp sometimes. Pretend what? That Miss Sterling and I are friends. Really good friends, like how Mommy Amanda has Richard now. Boyfriend and girlfriend kind of friends. But it's just pretend? Just for work, baby. Just so Daddy can keep taking care of you the way you deserve. Can you do that for me? Lily hugged her rabbit tighter, and James saw the confusion and worry on her face that no 6-year-old should have to carry. She'd already lived through 1 divorce, already learned that the adults in her life could lie with smiles on their faces, already understood that sometimes people left and never explained why. I guess, but I don't like lying. I know, sweetheart. Me neither. James pulled her into a hug, breathing in the strawberry scent of the cheap shampoo they bought at the dollar store. But sometimes grown-ups have to do complicated things to keep the people they love safe. Do you trust Daddy? Always. Then trust me now, okay? At exactly noon, a black Mercedes S-Class pulled up outside their building. The driver was an older man in a suit, silver hair and kind eyes, who introduced himself simply as Vincent. He loaded their 3 suitcases and 2 cardboard boxes into the trunk, without comment, without judgment, without any indication that he found it strange that a CEO's new husband owned so few possessions that they fit in the back of a car. Lily pressed her face against the window as they drove through downtown Chicago, her eyes wide at buildings she'd only ever seen from a distance. The Willis Tower rose above them like a monument to everything James had never been able to give her. All that glass and steel, representing a world that existed parallel to theirs, but never quite touching. Daddy, look, that building is so tall. That's where Miss Sterling works, baby. Where I used to work too, at night. You worked in a castle? Vincent smiled slightly in the rearview mirror. It does look like one, doesn't it, Miss Lily? Victoria's penthouse was on the 52nd floor of a glass and steel tower on Lakeshore Drive, the kind of address James had only ever seen in magazines. The elevator opened directly into the apartment. No hallway, no shared space, just straight into a foyer that was bigger than their entire studio. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Lake Michigan stretching to the horizon, the water gray and choppy under the October sky. The living room featured furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, art on the walls that James vaguely recognized from Lily's library, books about famous paintings, and a kitchen with appliances he didn't know how to operate. Lily gasped and grabbed James's hand tighter, not with excitement, but with something closer to fear. She'd never been in a place like this. Neither had he. It felt less like a home and more like a stage set, somewhere they were visiting but didn't belong. Victoria was waiting for them, dressed more casually than last night, in designer jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than James's monthly rent. But she still looked intimidating in a way that made him feel like an imposter who'd be discovered any second. "Welcome." She looked down at Lily and something in her expression shifted, going from corporate polish to awkwardly uncertain. "You must be Lily." Lily hid behind James's leg, peeking out with one eye like she was checking if the coast was clear. Victoria knelt down to Lily's eye level, her movements careful like she was approaching a skittish animal. James realized with a start that she had no idea how to interact with children. The woman who commanded boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals was completely lost when confronted with a 6-year-old. "I know this is scary. New places always are. But I promise you're safe here. And I think you're going to like your room." "I get my own room?" Lily's voice was small, tentative. "You do. Would you like to see it?" Lily looked up at James, seeking permission. He nodded, and she took a tentative step forward. Victoria stood and offered her hand with surprising gentleness. After a moment of hesitation, Lily took it, and James watched them walk down the hallway together, this strange woman and his daughter, beginning something he didn't fully understand but had already committed to. Victoria pushed open a door at the end of the hall and Lily's jaw dropped. The room was painted soft yellow with white trim. A canopy bed dominated one corner, covered in stuffed animals that still had their tags. Bookshelves lined an entire wall, filled with everything from picture books to middle-grade novels. There was a small desk with art supplies already arranged in neat containers, a window seat with cushions overlooking the city, and a toy box overflowing with dolls and games and puzzles. Is this really mine?" "For as long as you're here." Victoria's voice had lost its corporate edge completely. "My assistant wasn't sure what you liked, so she got a variety of things. If there's something specific you want that's not here, just tell me." Lily walked slowly into the room, touching everything like she was afraid it might disappear. She picked up a stuffed bear from the bed, holding it carefully with both hands, and James saw tears forming in the corners of her eyes. Not happy tears, overwhelmed tears, the tears of a child who'd never had much suddenly confronted with too much, not knowing if she was allowed to want it. "Can I really keep this? Everything in this room is yours." Then Lily did something that caught everyone off guard. She ran forward and wrapped her arms around Victoria's legs in an impulsive hug that made the CEO freeze like she'd been struck by lightning. Victoria's hands hovered uncertainly in the air before gently patting Lily's back with the awkwardness of someone who'd never comforted a child before. "Thank you. You're welcome, sweetheart." When Lily released her and started exploring the bookshelves with her rabbit tucked under one arm, Victoria caught James's eye. Something vulnerable flashed across her face. Surprise, maybe, or longing, before the professional mask returned. "James, my lawyer is waiting in my office." "Lily, there are snacks in the kitchen if you're hungry. The housekeeper, Maria, will be here in 20 minutes. She has a granddaughter your age and brought some games to play." Victoria's home office was all glass and steel, designed to intimidate. A woman in her 50s, with sharp gray eyes and hair pulled back in a severe bun, sat at the desk, a stack of legal documents in front of her thick enough to use as a weapon. She stood when they entered, and her expression made it clear she'd sized James up in the first 3 seconds and found him wanting. "James Connor, I'm Diane Rothman, Miss Sterling's attorney." She gestured to a chair with the kind of authority that suggested refusing wasn't an option. "Sit. We have a lot to cover and not much time." For the next 3 hours, Diane walked James through every detail of the fabricated story with the precision of a general planning a military campaign. She had everything mapped out, every contingency planned, every potential question anticipated. It was impressive and terrifying in equal measure. James and Victoria had met 7 months ago at a charity gala for STEM education at the Art Institute of Chicago. Victoria had been giving a speech about closing the opportunity gap in tech careers. James had been there volunteering as part of Sterling Technologies' employee community service program, helping with setup and breakdown. You talked during the cocktail hour about workforce development. Diane read from her notes like she was describing real events, not fiction they were creating from whole cloth. Victoria was impressed by your practical insights. You'd grown up without much money, worked your way through community college before financial constraints forced you to drop out. You understood the barriers that keep people trapped in low-wage work despite having skills and intelligence. She found that perspective valuable. James's stomach twisted. The backstory felt too close to the truth to be comfortable, like they were taking his real life and twisting it into something strategic. Diane continued with the timeline. Their first actual date was April 15th at a small Italian restaurant in Lincoln Park called Lucia's. James ordered the carbonara. Victoria had the seafood risotto. They talked about Lily, about Victoria's work, about their respective childhoods. The connection was immediate and genuine. You saw each other weekly after that, always low-key, coffee shops, walks by the lake, quiet dinners. Victoria wanted to keep the relationship private because of company policy about relationships between executives and employees. You understood and respected that boundary. When did we supposedly get engaged? You didn't. You went to City Hall 3 weeks ago and got married. Spontaneous, romantic. You both knew what you wanted and saw no reason to wait. Very modern, very practical. James tried to absorb the information. Dates, locations, conversations, emotions, like studying for an exam where failure meant losing everything. Diane pulled out another document, this one thicker than the others. The pages were densely packed with legal terminology that made James's eyes hurt just looking at it. The marriage license is real, filed legally with Cook County, but you need to understand what that means. You are actually married to Victoria Sterling. On paper, in the eyes of the law, you are her husband. This isn't a fake marriage, it's a marriage entered into under false pretenses, which is a different thing entirely. That seems extreme for a business dispute. Diane and Victoria exchanged a glance that made James's instincts prickle with warning. Nathan Pierce isn't just suing for control of the company. Diane's voice took on a careful quality, like she was choosing each word with precision. He's been systematically working to destroy Victoria's reputation for 3 years, planting stories in the media about her being cold, unstable, obsessed with work to an unhealthy degree, manipulating board members by suggesting she's unfit for leadership, hiring private investigators to dig up anything he can weaponize. This lawsuit is just the opening move. Why does he hate her so much? Victoria's jaw tightened. She stared out the window for a long moment before speaking, and when she did, her voice was hollow in a way that made James realize this wasn't just business for her. This was personal. This was about something that had broken her in ways she'd never let anyone see. Nathan and I built Sterling Technologies together. We were partners before we were married. Both of us fresh out of MIT, both convinced we were going to change the world. For 5 years, it worked. We grew the company from a startup in my apartment to a major player in AI software. Revenue hit 100 million, then 200, then 500. Her voice went flat. But success changed him. He started taking shortcuts, making deals that compromised our values. I found evidence he was embezzling, using shell corporations to siphon money from the company we'd built together. $8 million over 18 months. So you divorced him? I gave him a choice. Leave quietly with 50 million and sign away all claims to the company, or I'd go to the authorities with evidence of fraud and watch him go to prison. He took the money. Victoria turned to face James directly, and he saw something in her eyes that explained everything. The fear, the desperation, the willingness to pay a stranger to pretend to be her husband. But he's never forgiven me for it. In his mind, I betrayed him, chose the company over our marriage, and now he wants me to lose everything the way he did. The lawsuit isn't about business, it's about revenge. That's why you're so scared. I'm scared because I don't know what else he has. Nathan always has contingency plans, backup strategies, insurance policies. Whatever he reveals at that board meeting in 3 weeks, it's going to be designed to cause maximum damage. And I need to be ready for it. Diane pushed the contract across the desk. 23 pages of dense legal language that would take James hours to fully parse. Read it carefully. Once you sign, you're bound by its terms. If you violate the confidentiality clause or attempt to extort additional money, Victoria can sue you for breach of contract and you'll owe her $5 million in damages. Do you understand? James read through the key sections, forcing himself to focus despite the surreal feeling that he'd somehow stepped into someone else's life. The payments were clearly outlined. 50,000 within 24 hours, 150,000 upon successful completion of the 6-week arrangement. Lily's tuition at Rosewood Academy would be paid in full for the academic year. James's promotion to Director of Facilities Management would be effective immediately with a salary of $92,000 per year. There was also a prenuptial agreement, equally detailed, that made it clear James had no claim to Victoria's fortune. If the marriage ended and the contract specified it would end after 6 weeks unless both parties agreed to extend, James would leave with exactly what was specified in the contract and nothing more. His hands shook slightly as he signed. This was real. He just legally married a woman he didn't know, agreed to lie to everyone, and bound himself to a situation he didn't fully understand. The pen felt heavy in his hand, like he was signing away more than just his name. Diane collected the papers efficiently, like she did this sort of thing every day. Good. Now let's discuss your public appearances. The board meeting is in 3 weeks. Before that, you'll attend a small dinner party Victoria is hosting tomorrow night. 4 board members and their spouses. Consider it a dress rehearsal. Tomorrow, James's voice cracked. I'm not ready. You'll be ready. We're drilling you on the backstory all day today. Maria will work with Lily on appropriate behavior for formal events. You'll both have new wardrobes delivered this afternoon. Victoria's stylist is coming at 4 to make you look like someone who belongs in her world. The rest of the day blurred together in an overwhelming rush of preparation. Diane grilled James on details until he could recite their entire fictional relationship without hesitation. The name of the waiter at Lucia's, the color of Victoria's dress on their first date, the exact words he'd supposedly said when proposing they get married at City Hall. He struggled with the memorization at first, his brain feeling sluggish from stress and lack of sleep. But slowly the details started to stick, and he began to understand the strategy behind each choice. Every element of their story was designed to be believable, grounded in just enough truth to be convincing. Victoria jumped in to help when he stumbled, and they practiced their question and answer routine together. Something shifted during that process. They were building something together, even if it was built on lies. There was a strange intimacy in creating a shared history, deciding who they were to each other. The first kiss. Where was it? James looked at Victoria, realized they hadn't covered this. She met his eyes, and for a moment, the mask slipped completely. He saw uncertainty there, vulnerability, something that might have been hope. After the Lucia's date, you walked me to my car in the parking garage. It was raining. Her voice was soft, almost wistful. You opened the door for me, and when I turned to thank you, we just knew. It wasn't planned. It was perfect. The words hung in the air between them, and James wondered if she was describing something she wished had happened, some alternate version of her life where romance came naturally instead of being negotiated like a business deal. A stylist named Marcus arrived around 4 with racks of expensive clothes, measuring James with a tailor's eye and selecting outfits that transformed him from custodian to executive's husband. Suits from Tom Ford, casual wear from Ralph Lauren, shoes from Allen Edmonds. Everything fit perfectly, tailored to his frame, chosen to project confidence and success. You have good bone structure. Marcus circled him critically, adjusting the fit of a navy suit jacket. Strong jaw, nice eyes, decent posture, but you need a proper haircut. I'm calling Andre. Andre arrived an hour later, a French man with an accent so thick James could barely understand him. He transformed James's shaggy hair into something styled and professional, something that looked intentional instead of neglected. When James finally looked in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. The man staring back looked successful, polished, like someone who belonged in Victoria's world instead of cleaning it. Lily was having her own transformation. Maria, the housekeeper, had helped her pick out a dress for the dinner party and was teaching her formal dining etiquette in the dining room. When James found them, Lily was carefully folding a napkin while Maria corrected her technique with infinite patience. Like this, mija, napkin folded to the left of the plate. Why does it matter which side? Because details matter in formal settings. People notice these things. They make judgments about you based on small details. Lily saw James and ran over, her face lighting up with the kind of pure joy that made his chest ache. She'd already been bathed and dressed in new clothes, a simple blue dress that somehow managed to look both age-appropriate and expensive. Daddy, Maria is teaching me fancy stuff. James picked her up, noting how light she felt, how small. In 6 weeks, this would all be over. They'd take the money and leave, and Lily would have to readjust again, learn to live with less again, understand that castles were just temporary stops for people like them. I see that. You're becoming very sophisticated. What's sophisticated mean? It means fancy and smart at the same time. Victoria appeared in the doorway and James's breath caught. She'd changed into a simple black dress, her hair down around her shoulders instead of pulled back in that severe bun. She looked softer somehow, less like a CEO and more like a woman who might actually be someone's wife. More like someone who might laugh at dinner parties instead of negotiating mergers. The guests arrive at 7 tomorrow evening. Margaret Chen, Robert Hayes, Thomas Liu, and Carol Brennan, all board members, all skeptical of my ability to balance work and personal life. We need to convince them we're genuinely happy together. How do we do that? James set Lily down gently, watched her run back to Maria and her napkin folding lessons. Small touches, hand-holding, inside jokes, comfortable silence, the kind of intimacy that can't be faked easily. Victoria paused and James saw vulnerability flash across her face, at least the kind that's very difficult to fake convincingly. That night, after Lily was asleep in her new room, having insisted on reading 3 books and testing every stuffed animal on the bed, James stood in his own bedroom, staring at the California King mattress and wondering how his life had become so surreal in less than 24 hours. The room was bigger than their entire studio apartment. The bathroom had heated floors and a rainfall shower that probably used more water in one use than they'd used in a week at the old place. His phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. Heard you moved. New address? James's stomach dropped. How did she know already? He'd been planning to tell her himself to control the narrative, but someone must have seen the Mercedes or mentioned something to someone who knew someone. Chicago was a big city that somehow felt very small when you were trying to keep secrets. He typed back carefully. Yeah, I got a better place. Good for Lily. Where? James hesitated, then sent Victoria's address. There was no avoiding it. Amanda had legal rights to know where their daughter was living. Her response came immediately. Lakeshore Drive? How the hell did you afford that? My situation changed. We'll talk about it when you visit. You better believe we will. I'm coming tomorrow afternoon. James closed his eyes. Amanda would arrive right before the dinner party. This was going to be a disaster. He'd have maybe 2 hours to convince his ex-wife that his sudden change in circumstances was legitimate before having to convince Victoria's board members of the same thing. The lies were stacking up faster than he could keep track of them. He found Victoria in her office, working despite the late hour. The glow from her laptop screen cast shadows across her face, making her look younger and more vulnerable than she did in boardroom lighting. She looked up when he entered, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Can't sleep either? She gestured to the chair across from her desk, and James sat, feeling the weight of what they'd started settling over both of them. Amanda's coming tomorrow afternoon. She wants to see where Lily's living. Victoria set down her pen, processing this information with the same analytical precision she probably applied to business problems. That's actually good timing. How is that possibly good? Because the best way to convince Amanda this is real is to let her see us together. See Lily happy. See the life we're supposedly building. James leaned forward, elbows on his knees, trying to make sense of Victoria's logic. You don't know Amanda. She's competitive. She left because I couldn't provide the life she wanted, and now she's with someone who can. When she sees what I have now, she won't just accept it. She'll fight harder, just to prove she can. Then we make sure she can't win. Diane's already drafting a custody modification proposal. We'll offer Amanda reduced child support in exchange for you having primary custody. Frame it as giving her more freedom while ensuring Lily has the best possible life. What if she refuses? She won't, because fighting you now means going up against me, against my resources, my lawyers, my influence. Amanda's smart enough to know when she's outmatched. James wanted to argue, but Victoria was probably right. Amanda had always been pragmatic, even about motherhood. She'd loved the idea of having a daughter more than the reality of raising one, loved the Instagram photos and the mommy groups more than the actual work of parenting. There's something else. Victoria stood and walked around the desk, closer to where James sat, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive. Tomorrow night, during the dinner party, we need to act like a couple. That means physical affection, touching, casual intimacy. Are you comfortable with that? I don't have a choice, do I? There's always a choice, but some choices have consequences. She moved closer still, close enough that James could feel the warmth radiating from her body, and took his hand. Her skin was cool and smooth, her grip surprisingly gentle for someone who commanded boardrooms. She guided his arm around her waist with the efficiency of someone following a rehearsed choreography. Like this. Comfortable. Natural. Like we've done it 1,000 times before. James's heart was racing, and he knew she could probably feel it through the thin fabric of her dress. This felt dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with getting caught lying. This felt like stepping over a line they couldn't uncross. This feels anything but natural. It will eventually, but her voice wavered slightly, betraying that she was just as nervous as he was. They stood like that for a moment, neither quite sure what to do next. The silence stretching between them, loaded with awkwardness and something else James couldn't identify. Then Victoria stepped back, breaking the contact, and James felt an unexpected sense of loss. Tomorrow will be challenging. Amanda in the afternoon, then the dinner party in the evening. But if we get through it, the board meeting will be easier. And if we don't, she didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Then Nathan wins. I lose the company. You lose Lily, and both our lives fall apart. The weight of that reality settled between them like a third presence in the room. They tied their fates together with signatures on a contract, two strangers gambling everything on their ability to make people believe a lie. Tomorrow would be the first real test. Tomorrow, they'd find out if they could actually pull this off, or if they'd both just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Week 6 arrived with the inevitability of a deadline neither of them wanted to face. Diane appeared at the penthouse on Wednesday afternoon carrying the kind of folder that marked endings, thick manila, stuffed with documents that would dissolve what they'd built back into its component parts if they let it. Contract expires Friday at midnight. At that point, James, you received the final payment of $150,000. The marriage can be annulled if both parties agree, or you can remain legally married and renegotiate terms. She spread the papers across Victoria's desk with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before, though James suspected she hadn't. How many fake marriages that became real had Diane witnessed? The annulment documents sat on top, pristine and official, promising a clean exit for both of them if they chose it. You need to decide what happens next. After Diane left, James and Victoria sat on opposite sides of the desk, staring at the papers like they were landmines. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they'd built over 6 weeks and everything they stood to lose by making the wrong choice. What do you want? Victoria's voice was careful, like she was afraid the answer might shatter something fragile. You asked me that weeks ago. I think the question is, what do you want? I want you to stay. I want Lily to keep calling me Mom. I want to figure out how to make this weird, complicated thing we've built into something lasting. She looked up at him, vulnerable in a way that still caught him off guard. But I need to know it's what you want too, not because of money or obligation, because you choose it. James thought about 6 weeks ago when he'd been a janitor facing job loss. Thought about how Victoria had seemed like a monster using his vulnerability against him. Thought about how he'd planned to take the money and run. Then he thought about Lily reading bedtime stories with Victoria, about cooking dinner together while Lily did homework at the kitchen counter, about Rosa Morales offering forgiveness neither of them deserved, about falling asleep on this couch with his head on Victoria's shoulder while they watched bad movies. 3 weeks ago, I was a custodian facing job loss. Now I have custody of my daughter, a career that pays real money, and somewhere in the last 6 weeks I stopped pretending to love you and started actually doing it. Victoria's breath caught. You love me? Yeah, even though you're bossy and controlling and you work too much and you put hot sauce on everything, I love you anyway. I love you too, even though you leave wet towels on the bathroom floor and you're stubborn as hell and you won't admit when you're wrong about directions. They were both laughing and crying at the same time, the absurdity and reality of it crashing together in a way that felt more honest than anything James had experienced in his adult life. He picked up the annulment papers and held them for a moment, feeling their weight. We started this marriage as a lie. Let's try it as the truth instead. He tore the papers in half. The sound was satisfying and final, like closing a door on one version of their lives and opening another. Victoria stood and crossed to his side of the desk, and when she kissed him, it tasted like relief and terror in equal measure. Lily appeared in the doorway, having developed the uncanny ability all children possess to materialize during important adult moments. Are you guys okay? Victoria held out an arm. Perfect, sweetheart. How would you feel about this being forever instead of just for a while? Forever, like you're really my mom and not just pretending? Really, truly, if you want that. Lily threw herself at Victoria with the force of someone who'd spent her entire life learning that good things were temporary. I want that more than anything. James wrapped his arms around both of them, and somewhere in his chest, something settled that had been restless for years. They'd started as strangers making a desperate bargain, but they'd become something else through the alchemy of shared meals and bedtime stories and honest conversations about guilt and forgiveness. The call from Diane came Friday morning, 3 hours before the contract would have expired anyway. Amanda's lawyer contacted me. She's accepting the custody modification. Primary custody to you, James. 2 weekends monthly, reduced child support to $600. Also, Amanda's moving to Denver. Her boyfriend Richard got a VP position. They're relocating end of summer. James felt his lungs expand for what felt like the first time in months. When Amanda came that evening to pick up Lily for her weekend visitation, she stopped in the entryway with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not jealousy exactly, something closer to regret mixed with relief. She's happier here, happier than I ever managed to make her. You and Victoria, you're her real parents. I'm just the person who visits. After she left with Lily, Victoria found James on the balcony. Do you ever regret this? Giving up your freedom for a ready-made family and a complicated woman with a difficult past. Ooh, James pulled her close. I gave up working nights and barely seeing my daughter for a job that challenges me and a woman who makes me want to be better than I thought I could be. That's not sacrifice, that's winning. Winter settled over Chicago with the kind of cold that made the lake freeze at its edges. 2 months after they'd chosen to stay married, not the contract marriage that had expired in October, but the real one they'd chosen in December. Nathan made his final move. A package arrived at Sterling Technologies addressed to Victoria, no return address. Inside were photographs of James from 6 months ago, looking exhausted and disheveled in his custodian uniform. Lily's school records showing behavioral issues from 2 years back when Amanda had left. James's bankruptcy filing from 4 years prior, medical debt from his father's cancer treatment spread across pages like evidence of moral failure. The note was simple. Ready to show the world who your husband really is? Call me. We can make a deal. N. Victoria's hands shook as she showed James that evening. He's going to paint you as a con artist who scammed me. The media will destroy us. Let him. James's voice was steady. I filed bankruptcy after my dad died. Medical bills plus funeral costs. I had no choice. I'm not ashamed of that. The tabloids will say what they say. I'm not ashamed of where I come from or what I've done to survive. If Nathan wants to expose that, let him try. I'll own every bit of it. Diane's voice on speakerphone was cautious. If this goes public, the optics are challenging. Shareholders might panic. Then let them panic. We don't negotiate with him. Not now, not ever. That night, James wrote something he'd never written before. A LinkedIn post that laid bare his entire story. He didn't tell Victoria he was doing it, didn't ask permission, or run it past lawyers. He just wrote the truth the way he'd learned to speak it over the past 2 months, honest and plain and unashamed. The post detailed everything Nathan had threatened to expose. Growing up in Cicero in a 2-bedroom house, his father the union welder, dropping out of community college to care for a dying parent, the bankruptcy at 30 from medical debt he'd never agreed to but inherited anyway, working as a janitor for 4 years, invisible to people who never learned his name, meeting Victoria not through planning, but through desperation, through bringing his daughter to work because he had no other choice. We fell in love. Fast, complicated, imperfect. I married her knowing people would judge, knowing people would assume I was after her money. I signed a prenup that guarantees I get nothing if we divorce. I married her anyway. Someone is trying to destroy our family by exposing my past. Fine, here it is. I was poor. I made mistakes. I struggled. I filed bankruptcy. I worked night shifts while my daughter slept on office couches. I did what I had to do to survive. But I'm not ashamed. My dad taught me honest work deserves dignity. I've worked honestly my entire life. If that's shameful, then I'm guilty. I love my wife. I love my daughter. We're a real family. If you don't believe that, I don't care. We know the truth. To the person trying to hurt us, you failed. You can't shame someone who refuses to be ashamed. The post went viral. 2 million views in 24 hours, 500,000 likes. Other executives sharing similar stories about growing up poor, about fighting through bankruptcy, about the shame society attaches to survival. The hashtag honest work trended nationally. Sterling stock didn't drop. It climbed 8%, higher than before Nathan's attacks. Nathan's attempt at blackmail backfired spectacularly. His own lawyer quit when the attempted extortion came to light, citing ethics violations. Sterling's board issued a public statement supporting James and Victoria. Shareholders demanded Nathan sell his remaining stock. Within a week, he'd gone from powerful executive to pariah, shut out of the industry he'd helped build. No arrest, no dramatic downfall, just the slow realization that he'd become irrelevant. The ultimate defeat for someone who'd craved power above everything else. Victoria read the LinkedIn post with tears streaming down her face. You didn't tell me you were doing this. You've been defending me for months. My turn to defend us. Spring came late to Chicago that year, winter refusing to release its grip until April brought warmth that felt earned rather than given. 6 months after the contract had expired, James woke to find Victoria already up, coffee brewing, staring out at Lake Michigan as ice broke into chunks that drifted toward open water. I want to do something. Come with me. They drove to City Hall, the same building where they'd filed their marriage license 8 months ago, under completely different circumstances. The same clerk was working, the woman who'd processed their paperwork, when they'd been strangers performing a transaction. She recognized them immediately, her face lighting up with the kind of joy that comes from witnessing something improbable work out against all odds. You too, I remember you. You looked terrified that day. We were. And now? James and Victoria looked at each other, and the answer was written in the way they stood, the way their hands found each other without thinking, the way Lily bounced between them with the confidence of a child who knew her family was solid. Now we're sure. They renewed their vows in front of the clerk with Lily as their only witness. Simple words, honest this time, stripped of performance and pretense. Victoria, 8 months ago I married you out of desperation. Today I marry you out of love. You saw me when I was invisible. You made me believe I deserved more than survival. You taught me that love isn't about where you come from. It's about where you're willing to go together. James, 8 months ago, I married you out of fear. Today, I marry you out of choice. You taught me that success means nothing without people to share it with. You gave me a family when I'd convinced myself I didn't deserve one. You defended me when I couldn't defend myself. Lily insisted on adding her own vow, standing between them with the seriousness of someone taking a sacred oath. "And I love both of you. Can we get pizza after this?" The clerk cried and handed them tissues along with their signed paperwork. The same marriage, different meaning. Outside, Chicago was blooming into spring, the harsh winter finally releasing its grip. They got pizza. They went home. They started building the next chapter with the same careful attention they'd given the first one. Summer brought Sarah and her husband Tom from Boston with infant David Thomas, named for the boy who died, named for the guilt she'd carry forever, but was learning to live alongside. Victoria held her nephew and cried, and Sarah whispered thank you over and over like a prayer, like forgiveness was something that needed constant renewal to stay real. Fall arrived with this kind of crispness that made Chicago feel alive again after summer's humidity. Sterling Technologies prepared for its first annual scholarship ceremony, the David Morales Memorial Program, funding full college tuition for children of custodial and facilities workers across Illinois. 15 students would receive awards at the inaugural event, 15 families who'd spent years wondering how they'd afford higher education, suddenly given the same chances as everyone else. The ceremony was held in Sterling's main auditorium, 300 seats filled with parents in their work uniforms, custodians, maintenance workers, security guards, people who'd spent careers being invisible, finally being seen. James stood backstage with Victoria, watching through the curtain as the seats filled. His hands shook slightly, and she took one in both of hers. "You did this. You showed them that honest work matters. We did this, together." Victoria walked on stage to introduce the program, and James watched her command the room with the same confidence she brought to investor meetings. But this time with something else underneath, genuine emotion, unmasked care for the people she was addressing. "My husband taught me something I should have learned years ago. The people who keep our buildings running, who work night shifts so their children can sleep safely, who sacrifice their own comfort for their families, they deserve the same opportunities as everyone else. This program exists because we forgot that for too long. The David Morales Memorial Scholarship is our attempt to remember." 15 students walked across the stage to receive their awards. Jerome's daughter Marisol was among them, the girl whose father had worked nights for 15 years so she could have a better life. When her name was called, Jerome stood in the audience crying openly, and Marisol's speech cut through every defense James had built against his own emotions. "My dad worked third shift at Sterling Technologies for 15 years. He'd come home at dawn smelling like cleaning chemicals, sleep a few hours, then wake up to help me with homework before going back to work. He did that every day, every week, every year. People walked past him like he wasn't there, but he was there. He was always there for me." Her voice strengthened. "I'm going to Northwestern to study engineering. Not because I'm smarter than my dad, I'm not, but because someone finally recognized that people like us deserve chances too. Because Mr. and Mrs. Connor decided honest work deserves dignity. Thank you for seeing us. Thank you for making my dad's sacrifice worth something." The auditorium erupted in standing ovation. James couldn't see through his tears. Victoria's hand found his and squeezed, and when he looked at her, she was crying too. They'd started this journey as two desperate people making a transaction. They'd become something else entirely, people who understood what it meant to be invisible and were using their visibility to change things for others. After the ceremony, walking through the crowds of grateful families, they passed Miguel finishing his evening shift in the hallway. The young man looked surprised when James stopped. "Miguel, right?" "Yes, sir. I used to do what you do. Same shift, same building, same feeling of being invisible. Thank you for the work you do. It matters. And if you ever need anything, better equipment, different hours, help with anything, my office is always open. You're not invisible. Not to us." Miguel's eyes went wet. "Thank you, Mr. Connor. That means everything." After he walked away, Victoria leaned against James. "You still see them. Always will. That was me. Could have been me forever if things had gone different. Then we keep making sure people like Miguel have options. That's what we're here for." They drove home through autumn twilight, Chicago's skyline catching fire with sunset. Lily chattered from the back seat about the ceremony, about Marisol's speech, about whether she wanted to be an engineer too when she grew up. At the penthouse, they made chocolate chip cookies together. Lily directing operations, Victoria comfortable enough now to laugh when half the chocolate chips disappeared into mouths instead of batter. James taking photos of moments he'd once been too afraid to believe would last. Later, after Lily was asleep with Max, the golden retriever, curled at the foot of her bed, James found Victoria on the balcony. The space had become theirs over the past year. The place where fear was processed and decisions were made and honest conversations happened under the cover of darkness and city lights. Remember the first night we stood here? You told me I needed to give Rosa something real instead of money. Changed everything. You changed everything. You saw me when I was just as invisible as you felt. We saved each other. Victoria turned in his arms. No, we chose each other. There's a big difference. James thought about the deal that had started this, about Victoria's ultimatum that had felt like coercion, but had really been two desperate people finding each other in the dark. He thought about his father's words, honest work for honest pay, and realized he'd done the most honest work of his life building this family. The pay had been better than any contract could specify. 8 months ago, you made me an offer I couldn't refuse. Pretend you're my husband or pack your things. I said yes out of fear, out of desperation, because I had no choice. Victoria looked pained, but he continued. But if you asked me today, if I had all the choices in the world, all the money, all the stability, I'd still say yes. I'd choose this, choose you, choose us every single time. Because the best things in life aren't the ones we plan carefully. They're the ones that ambush us in midnight hallways and force us to choose between safety and possibility. Inside, their kitchen still smelled like burnt cookies. Tomorrow they'd wake up and do it all again, the homework and the bedtime stories and the honest work of building a life together. The contract had expired months ago, but what they'd built had outlasted any legal agreement. They weren't together because they were required to be. They were together because they chose it. Every single day, they chose this. People ask James sometimes if he regretted taking that deal, starting a marriage with a lie. He told them he regretted the circumstances that forced the choice. He regretted the desperation. But the outcome? Never. Because most love stories don't start with perfect timing and clear intentions. They start messy, complicated, with two people who need each other meeting at exactly the right or exactly wrong moment. Victoria and James hadn't fallen in love the traditional way. They'd built it, piece by piece, through crisis and compromise, through truth and forgiveness. They'd earned each other in a way that felt more permanent than anything that came easy. And in doing so, they'd learned something worth remembering. Sometimes honest work and honest love are the same thing. Both require showing up every day and doing the hard thing even when it would be easier to walk away. Both deserve dignity. Both are worth fighting for. The fake marriage had become the realest thing in their lives, and they'd do it all over again in a heartbeat.